Ontario is making several changes to protect tenants from landlords, like landlords are the enemy. New rules have come out for the landlord and tenant board. They are going to affect a lot in the market these days. Now, I pay attention to everything that is happening across North America. That's where I specialize in Canada and the United States. And we want to buy properties that make sense for us. And remember that we have to have a diverse portfolio. Never put all your eggs in one basket. It's important to keep up with these laws so we know how to react and float like a butterfly, sting like the bee, right? Muhammad Ali. All right, let's get into the article of today. Ontario is making several changes to protect tenants from landlords, like landlords are the enemy. All right, so Ontario government is moving to support tenants in the province further by increasing the number of adjudicators to speed up decision timeframes to help tackle the astounding number of cases to the board. Now, for you to know, when we go and look at the board, now we're talking about Ontario, but we're also going to make a lot of generalizations across the different provinces and states because all over the place when COVID started, now all of a sudden, all of these different provinces and states were putting these moratoriums into leave people in their properties. You cannot evict for any reason. Now, with any law that comes by, there are opportunities for people to take advantage of them. So even though some people may have kept their job, working from home as a lawyer or something, making good money, they now could just stop paying rent absolutely and nothing could happen to them for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. Time goes on, depends on the province and state. They had all of these different timelines that they were able to not pay. Now, if we went back before all the shutdowns, we were looking at times that would take 8 months, 9 months. Now, what do I mean by that? Like, say there was a dispute between a landlord and a tenant, and the biggest reason usually is that they're not going to pay any rent. So, say they didn't pay any rent, they can now live in your property for 8 or 9 months where I live. Now, at the end, right where we are today, people are generally living there for 14 months for free. So in addition to the landlord having very high costs of their mortgages, and the mortgages have gone skyrocketed this year, their insurance premiums have gone up, their condo fees have gone up, everything has gone up on them. Now they have to float at 100% and pay the rent for them. Now, if you've been to a lot of the tribunals in different provinces and the states, they generally always side with the tenant, and the tenant, we don't even talk about money when we're in those. They just say, all right, you're going to have to leave. But nobody wants to talk about the $30,000 of rent that you haven't paid. That just never comes up. So you have to do your due diligence up front whenever you're going to let somebody move into your home in some of these properties. Now, almost all properties will fall into two buckets. Generally, they fall under two different categories. In the United States, it's more like kind of liberal or conservative or Republican and Democrat. Different states have different rules, and we have to pay attention to those rules whenever we're going to do that. So let's jump back in and we're going to make some parallels between them. So in where I live, Ontario, they're aiming to appoint 40 adjudicators and hire 5 staff. And so this is not like ground shaking, like I know they're saying 6.5 million. I don't know how they're going to do that just to hire 45 people. Now they're talking about strengthening a broad range of tenant protections. Now the board has been criticized for long delays, as long as 7-8 months. I'm telling you that it actually lasts 14 months. And that's not even the worst in Canada. Now, if we continue down, they want to enhance rights to make sure that they install air conditioning into their units. They also want to propose against evictions due to renovations, demolitions, or the landlord use. So now even the own landlord might not be able to move in unless they can prove to you with even stronger resolve that they're using it for themselves. That's surprising for me. Also, they're increasing the fines from $100,000 to individuals if you did bad faith to $500,000 for corporations. This is the problemo. So number one, enshrined in all rights everywhere, is if you're renting out your property, you should always be able to take it over for yourself or a loved one in your family. So if it was your parents, a child, you should always be able to do that with proper notice, obviously, and outside of a lease, regardless of where you are nor in any province or state. So like I said, you generally have 2 pools of properties. And so you'll have properties in regular blue states like New York, California, stuff like that, or you're going to have typically conservative or Republican states. And think of them like Florida, down in Tennessee, Texas, stuff like that. Okay, in Canada, if you're looking at a conservative place, you could look at a place like Alberta. And where I am in Ontario, it's very, very liberal here for the laws. They generally back up the tenant rights. So here, you could live 14 months rent free, essentially. Of course, you're going to have to go, you're going to get evicted. It could affect your credit, all that stuff. But if they decided not to pay, they could live for like 14 months. But why would people live here and rent here and buy here? Remember, every city, every province, every state, the average is generally 35% of all properties are rentals. And this goes decades and decades and decades back. Of course, it fluctuates a tiny little bit, usually between 63%, 66, but it's generally always 65. That's a big tip. So there's always rentals out there, and it's important to know that. But if you go to a place like Quebec, very, very socialist in Quebec, Canada, and you could live like 2 years without paying rent. Sheesh. But the reason why people generally do it is because number one, they always want to buy a unit next to where they live. This could be a big mistake for you. Most people want to drive by their rental or just run by it and go check on it. Remember, professional investors have their properties property managed. They have someone else take care of the renovations and unplugging toilets and have somebody else do it. So we teach that all the time. So you would generally buy a place like in Toronto where you have this threat that somebody may be there, but you have to do your due diligence up front. If you do it up front, you can have a good relationship between the landlord and the tenant where you're both working toward the same goal. Now, we are going to have some more adjudicators, so the time will come down from 14 months, hopefully, but there's a huge, huge, huge backlog that is there. But generally, people are buying there because those types of properties have huge appreciation. So if we're thinking about appreciation where we live, it wasn't uncommon, for the past 15, 20 years for us to see over 10% a year up, 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 up in prices. So that is why people are willing to take that risk sometimes because they're making so much money on appreciation. Whereas a lot of places that are more conservative, if we're thinking about Texas, Florida, the prices have gone up a lot. Or if you're thinking Alabama, Tennessee, if you're thinking about Alberta, prices are not going up 10% per year. They're much more structural inflation price rises. And as those prices are going up, they have different laws in how they treat tenants. And now tenants in some places, if you're thinking about those typical red states down in the United States or Alberta, or if we're even thinking about Saskatchewan or New Brunswick, you're generally going to be having to be evicted within 7 days, 14 days, something like that. Very, very short term until you're evicted for non-payment. So there's different places with different rules. Generally, the two big things are I can raise the rent as much as I want on the landlords, and I can remove somebody for non-payment very, very quickly. Now, this is in the majority of right-leaning provinces and states. Now, in the left-leaning provinces and states, you generally have a lot of tenant rights where you're not allowed to raise the rent controls. We also have a lot of rights where we cannot evict them quickly. But in those markets, you also have long periods of time, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, where you're getting 10% appreciation every single month. And imagine making 10% on $700,000 or something. You're making a lot of money every single month. And so it kind of evens it out. Like I always say, you should never put all your eggs in one basket. You should have a diverse portfolio. So you should have some properties in bigger cities, some in medium cities, maybe have some commercial property mixed in there amongst different places. So my main goal here is for you to understand how it works because we get good at anything by doing it consistently. So open your eyes. If you are always used to having a rental just in your town where you can drive by it, this is the biggest mistake I think. You have to think outside of that. What if you bought in the next town over? What if you bought in the next province over? Or on the other side of the country? What if you bought in a different country? And keep on expanding your skill set because this is the way that you're going to get financially free. I did it. I'm sure that everyone else can do it. I came from welfare. I couldn't even afford food to eat. And so it is all about doing it consistently and learning consistently. So we have to understand what the laws are. The laws are always, always, always changing. But generally speaking, the province and states, they have a road that they're staying on and they change a little bit. They don't generally go from a province or a state where they're like, you cannot evict for a year and a half, just saying you can evict in 7 days. Never seen that happen. So I'm wondering what you're seeing because where I am, it is generally speaking that you are not allowed to raise the rent as much as you want, except in buildings built after 2018. Okay, so there is a caveat to that, but there's a lot of buildings in Toronto that were built after 2018. This has been a booming town for a long time. So some people are getting these huge $700 increases in rent, massive, massive increases. And so it's hurt a lot of people. So remember, we have to know the laws. I know that they're complicated, but it's the world that we live in. It's the hand of cards that we're dealt. Anyway, I wish you guys the very, very best. This is changing a lot of laws, and there's a lot more to change as well. So we got to be on top of it. We're going to be doing another video on how everything has changed for the Real Estate Council of Ontario, because now all the laws have changed. We no longer have a client and customer relationship. We now have a client and a self-represented category. Completely new, never been done before. So we're going to do another video about that. It is very, very important because the days that we operated all the other years of my career are now gone. It's a legal requirement. And so everything is going to change for home buyers, not for home sellers. Anyway, I wish you guys the very, very best getting through this muck. We're in a big, big recession right now, and it's going to continue for some time. But if you stick with me, I'll help you out of it. I wish you the very best. Have a great night, everyone.